You ever had that feeling like, wow, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know? Principles for Success by Ray Dalio.
Yeah, it's like a distilled guide, you could say, not just for like conventional success, but for building a meaningful life by really engaging with how things actually work.
Precisely. And just to be super clear up front, this isn't us telling you what to do. The video itself is very clear on that.
Mm.
These are described as overarching life principles,
Mhm.
things learned over a whole lifetime of experiences, often, through making mistakes.
Trial and error,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. So our goal here is really to pull out the most valuable nuggets for you, things that might help on your specific journey, whatever that looks like. Think of it less as rules, more as food for thought.
Good way to put it. And the very first point he makes is just how vital it is to, quote, think for yourself about what is true.
Sounds simple? Maybe.
Mm.
But it's actually quite profound.
It really is. Because if you don't actively decide what you think is true, what your values are, well, you risk just being pushed around by other people's ideas or circumstances, right? You might end up somewhere you didn't intend.
Okay, so that leads into this idea of principles. What exactly are they in this context?
The video defines them as smart ways for handling things that happen over and over again in similar situations.
Ah, okay, like patterns.
Exactly, patterns. And he gives examples we can all relate to. Skiing, raising children, even cooking.
Right, things where you learn, okay, when this happens, this is usually a good way to respond.
Precisely. It's about recognizing those recurring situations and figuring out effective ways to deal with them. It makes you think about the principles we all kind of operate on, maybe without even realizing it.
And where did his principles come from? Not thin air, I gather.
Definitely not. He stresses they came from experience, especially from making mistakes and then really reflecting on them, thinking deeply about what went wrong.
So learning from failure, essentially.
Very much so. And he's clear. It's not like he figured it all out years ago. He says he's still learning, still refining his principles.
That's important. It shows it's an ongoing process, not a destination.
Exactly. A continuous journey of adapting and learning.
Then there's this analogy he uses time as a river.
Yeah, I like that one.
We're all just being carried along, and the river constantly brings us into contact with, well, reality, encounters that force us to make decisions.
And you can't stop the river, right? You can't avoid the encounters.
Nope. But you can get better at handling them, better at navigating. It's a useful way to think about the relentless flow of life and choices.
And the sheer volume of decisions is just staggering when you think about it. Millions, potentially, over a lifetime.
Millions. Wow.
Yeah. And the video makes the point that the quality of all those decisions added up really determines the quality of your life.
It makes sense. Every choice, big or small, steers you slightly.
The cumulative effect.
Which brings us neatly to mistakes, something most of us, try to avoid thinking too much about.
Right. But he argues that's where the gold is, basically. Reflecting on mistakes was key for him. That's how he built principles to avoid making the same ones again.
And he credits that process for his journey, right? From being just an ordinary middle-class kid to achieving success, but also, importantly, finding meaningful work and relationships.
Yeah, the meaning part seems just as crucial as the conventional success part, in his view. It really makes you pause and think, how much do we really analyze our own screw-ups to learn from them?
Good question. It's uncomfortable. Which links to the next idea, embracing reality, dealing with it directly.
He talks about wanting a great life, but also having this significant fear of boredom and mediocrity.
Interesting. Fear of boredom more than fear of failure.
Apparently, yes, especially early on. And that actually fueled his willingness to take risks.
So sometimes fear can be a motivator too, not just ambition.
Seems so. And that led to what he calls the crash and learn cycle.
Crash and learn. Tell me more.
It's like you go after your goals, you inevitably hit obstacles, you crash, but then you reflect, you learn, you get better, and hopefully you crash a bit less next time.
Okay, so it's iterative.
Exactly. And he even says he eventually grew to appreciate the whole cycle, even the crashing part.
Wow, that's a mindset shift. Seeing failure not as the end, but as data, as part of the process.
Right. Which flows into another key principle. Truth is the essential foundation for producing good outcomes.
Truth. Okay, what does he mean by truth here?
Simply the way the world works.
Yeah.
Like the underlying laws of reality, cause and effect. We didn't invent them, but understanding them and working with them is how we evolve and achieve things.
Aligning with reality, basically.
Yeah. Which leads to this concept he calls hyperrealism.
Hyperrealism. Sounds intense. Is it like being cynical?
No, not necessarily. It's more about deeply understanding, accepting, and working with reality exactly as it is. Not how you wish it was or how you fear it might be, but just the facts on the ground.
So clear-eyed assessment.
Yeah.
No sugarcoating.
Precisely. And he argues this isn't about giving up on dreams. Actually, he says it's the best way to choose achievable dreams and then figure out how to make them happen.
How so?
Well, imagine you want to, say, climb a huge mountain. Hyperrealism isn't saying, don't dream of the summit. It's saying, okay, let's be brutally honest about the weather conditions, the gear needed, your current fitness level, the actual risks involved.
Got it. So you combine the big dream with a very realistic assessment of the starting point and the challenges.
Exactly. Big dreams plus hyperrealism plus determination that's presented as the powerful combo.
And what about success itself? How is that defined?
Crucially, the video says it's personal. You define it for yourself. Maybe it's changing the world. Maybe it's living peacefully.
But whatever your goal.
You still need effective ways to make decisions, face challenges, learn from mistakes, deal with your own limitations. Those underlying needs are universal.
It really puts the focus on the internal journey, not just external markers.
And part of that is shifting how you view problems. He suggests seeing them as puzzles.
Puzzles instead of, like, catastrophes.
Yeah. Puzzles that, if you solve them, offer rewards not just the solution itself, but insights that help you build better principles for the future.
Ah, that connects back. So pain plus reflection equals progress.
That's the formula he uses. Pain plus reflection, progress. And he mentions meditation can be helpful for building that reflective muscle.
Interesting. Okay, so this leads into a practical framework.
Yes, a simple 5-step process for navigating things.
Okay, let's break it down. Step 1.
Know your goals and go after them. But this includes really understanding yourself, what you truly want and why. It's not just picking a target, it's knowing the motivation behind it.
Self-awareness first. Got it. Step 2.
Encounter the problems, the obstacles that inevitably pop up between you and your goals. He says these are often painful, but they're essential for growth. Don't just, put up with them.
Acknowledge and confront the barriers. Okay. Step 3.
Diagnose those problems to get at their root causes. This is critical. Don't just treat the symptoms. Really dig deep like a detective to understand the underlying issue. Avoid jumping to quick fixes.
Resist the easy answer. Analyze properly. Makes sense. Step 4.
Design a plan. Based on your diagnosis, figure out what specific actions you need to take to overcome the root cause of the problem. This is the strategy part.
Okay, developing the solution. And finally, step 5.
Execute. Do the things you designed in your plan. Push yourself to take action and actually implement the solution. Follow through.
Goals, problems, diagnosis, design, execute.
And he stresses this isn't linear, it's a cycle. You go through it again and again. He calls it personal evolution.
Like leveling up in a game, sort of.
Kind of. And he says it applies to anything that evolves, products, companies, us. But he also warns as you get better, you tend to take on bigger challenges, so the struggle doesn't necessarily get easier.
Ah, new level, new monsters.
Pretty much. And a key point. People naturally have different strengths and weaknesses across these 5 steps.
Right. Some people are great planners, but poor executors, or vice versa.
Exactly. So knowing your own profile, where you're strong and where you might need help, is really important.
This sounds very logical, but then he shares a story where things went very wrong, right?
Yeah.
The 1982 bet.
Yes, a really pivotal moment. He was convinced, based on his analysis, that a major depression was coming. He bet heavily on it.
Yeah.
It didn't happen. The market went the other way. He lost a lot of money, had to let almost everyone in his company go, ended up borrowing money from his dad just to get by.
Wow. That must have been crushing.
He describes it as incredibly painful, embarrassing, humbling, made him question everything, his whole approach.
What was the big lesson from that failure?
A crucial one. Being wrong, especially being wrong big, can wipe out a lot of previous wins. One bad mistake can undo years of good work if you're not careful.
A sobering reminder about risk.
Definitely. But also, the experience reinforced the need to handle setbacks well. He stresses that things will go wrong for you. It happens to everyone.
It's inevitable.
Right. The key is how you react. Can you reflect honestly, face the reality even when it's harsh, and figure out the best path forward? That failure really hammered home the importance of embracing reality.
So failure is a teacher again, but on a much larger scale.
Exactly. And this leads him to zoom out, to offer a wider perspective. He talks about seeing everything as a kind of machine.
A machine, like clockwork.
Sort of. Galaxies, economies, nature, us, all operating according to certain laws, part of a perpetual motion system. And in that grand scheme, each of us is just a tiny bit in 1 nanosecond.
Okay, that's a very cosmic view. How does that help, practically?
It can offer perspective. When you're facing your own reality, your own problems, seeing them against that vast backdrop can sometimes make them feel a bit more manageable. It can temper the emotional reaction.
Detachment, almost. Seeing the bigger picture.
A bit, yeah. And it ties into another idea that most things that happen, even if they feel unique to us, are often just another one of those, like variations on themes that have happened before.
History repeating itself, or rhyming at least.
Right. He suggests approaching situations like a biologist, finding an animal, identify what kind of situation it is, then apply the relevant principles you've learned for dealing with that type of thing.
So, pattern recognition again.
Yes. And he mentions his 1982 mistake was partly because he missed the relevant historical parallels. He was too focused on the present looking slightly different, rather than seeing the deeper recurring pattern.
That's a common trap, looking only at recent history.
Very common. And this all links back to risk and reward, too. The idea that generally to get more out of life, you have to take on more risk.
The jungle analogy.
Yeah, the safe life might be boring, while the potentially fabulous life requires crossing a dangerous jungle. Balancing that risk and reward effectively is key. You have to understand the risks you're taking.
Okay, so we need to be realistic, embrace truth, learn from mistakes, understand patterns. But what gets in the way? He mentions barriers, right?
Yes. 2 big barriers everyone faces: ego and blind spots. And he says they're basically wired into our brains.
Ego and blind spots. Let's start with ego.
The ego barrier, as he describes it, is what stops us from acknowledging our weaknesses objectively. Our emotional brain, our need to feel good about ourselves or be seen as right, can override our rational need to see the truth.
So when someone points out a flaw, we get defensive instead of curious.
Exactly. That defensive reaction is the ego barrier in action. It blocks learning and leads to bad decisions because you're not dealing with the real you.
Okay, that makes sense. What about blind spots?
The blind spot barrier is the simple fact that none of us can see everything. We think we see reality clearly, but we all have filters, different ways of processing information.
Like some people see the big picture, others focus on details.
Right, or think linearly versus laterally. There are countless variations. The barrier isn't having blind spots everyone does, it's believing you don't have any. Thinking you see the whole picture when you only see a part.
And these 2 barriers, ego and blind spots, they lead to
Poor decisions,
No.
potentially disastrous ones. He even connects it to Aristotle's idea of tragedy. A terrible outcome caused by a fatal flaw the person could have fixed but didn't, often because of ego or blind spots.
Wow, high stakes. So how do we overcome them?
The key shift, he says, the holy grail, is genuinely changing your goal from wanting to be right to wanting to find out what's true.
Okay, prioritizing learning over validation. How do you do that?
His main strategy is seeking out thoughtful people who disagree with him, intentionally looking for smart people with different perspectives.
To argue with them.
No, not to win an argument. To genuinely try and see the situation through their eyes. To understand their reasoning. He calls it thoughtful disagreement. The goal is collaborative discovery of truth, not proving yourself right.
That takes humility. Letting go of the need to win.
It does. He uses an analogy. It's like going from seeing the world in black and white to seeing it in color. Other people's perspectives add dimensions you simply can't see on your own.
That's a powerful image. Seeing in color.
Yeah. Think about navigating that dangerous jungle we mentioned earlier. Wouldn't you want people with you who see threats or opportunities you might miss?
Absolutely. Different vantage points.
And this connects back to the 5 steps. Since nobody's great at all 5, you need others. You need to identify people who are strong where you're weak and learn from them or work with them.
So, teamwork, but based on identified strengths and thoughtful disagreement.
Right, which leads to concepts like radical open-mindedness, really being open to the possibility you're wrong, and believability weighting.
Believability weighting. What's that?
It means figuring out how much weight to give someone's opinion based on their track record and reasoning in that specific area. Not all opinions are equally valuable on all topics. You weigh the input of credible people more heavily.
Okay, so be open, but also be discerning about whose input you prioritize.
Exactly. He talks about actively seeking out strong, independent thinkers, people committed to truth and transparency, and building teams or relationships based on that, An idea meritocracy.
An idea meritocracy,
Yeah.
where the best idea wins.
Yeah, regardless of who suggests it or their position, it relies on that radical truthfulness and open-mindedness where challenges are welcomed and logic and evidence rule.
That sounds challenging to implement, but potentially very powerful.
Extremely. And he wraps up by reminding us that even the most successful people struggle. They have weaknesses.
So they're not superheroes.
No, they just get good at managing those weaknesses, often by collaborating with others who have complementary strengths. He also notes that strengths and weaknesses are often linked, like two sides of the same coin.
Interesting. And setbacks.
Setbacks are tests. They force a choice. Learn, evolve, and push forward, or give up.
So success isn't just hitting the target.
No, he reframes it. Success is really about the personal evolution you gain through the struggle itself, the journey, the growth.
That changes the focus quite a bit.
It does. And over time, he suggests, the focus can shift from just your own success to the success of the mission or the well-being of the people around you.
A broader sense of purpose.
Yeah. He even expresses a desire to help others succeed beyond his own lifetime, seeing it as a failure if he can't pass on what he's learned effectively.
Passing the torch.
Exactly. And finally, he connects all these individual struggles back to that big picture idea of evolution, the constant cycle of things, where machines, breaking down, learning, reforming, improving over time, we're all part of that larger story.
So quite a journey from practical steps to almost philosophical reflections.
It really covers a lot of ground, but it all seems to circle back to that core idea of engaging honestly with reality, learning constantly, and evolving.
Right. So wrapping this up, what we've explored here are some really foundational principles, not presented as rigid rules, but more like a way of thinking about navigating life and pursuing goals, whatever they are for you.
Yeah, it's a framework. And the real value comes when you, the listener, actually think about how these ideas might apply to your life. Do they resonate? Are they useful?
Which parts fit, which parts maybe don't. The encouragement is definitely to adapt them, make them your own, consider them critically.
Absolutely. It's about using them as tools for your own consideration and growth.
So perhaps the thought to leave you with is this. How will you choose to approach your own evolution? Facing reality, learning from crashes, working with others? It takes courage, doesn't it?
It really does. The courage to struggle, to reflect, and to keep striving for whatever that great life means to you.
Definitely something to mull over.